Note that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission is meeting virtually. The meeting is being streamed live on the Port's YouTube channel. Call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular Commission meeting of May 13th, 2020.
I so move.
Second.
Pam, would you please do a roll call vote for us?
Yes, Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Koupril-Comus,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Pierce,
Aye.
and Saruda.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Curtis, if you could please provide us the Executive Director's report and your remarks.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Madam President. I would like to acknowledge the Port's monthly safety champions. I was hoping, there we go. They are now up on the screen again. Great performance by Port staff, watching out for each other and for folks engaged in our properties, connected to our properties. Thank you, safety champions. Stan, I wonder if you are with us this morning and might provide a safety message.
You bet. My safety message today is that the Port is continuing to execute on our employee safety continuous improvement plans. The COVID-19 pandemic has put safety and health at the forefront of consciousness for everyone. Our essential businesses continue to operate with additional COVID-focused safety and health controls set in place. Our ability to resolve and return to essential operations while reimagining the next normal is an indicator of our learning safety culture. Each year in June, the Port engages all employees and contingent employees to recommit to safety and health for themselves and their coworkers by completing our safety and health policy e-learning course. The policy starts with our belief that the safety and health of each employee is of paramount importance. I'm proud to say that we are living that statement through this pandemic. We were out of the HQ office earlier than most on March 13th for physical distancing, and we are only posturing to return, not racing back, when the authorities having jurisdiction allow, though still supporting essential operations. On screen, you'll note other policy abstracts. We absolutely promote active employee involvement, participation, and ownership in our safety programs. Our goal is zero injuries. We will go above and beyond regulations to continuously improve toward our goal. And the proactive leading metrics we monitor indicate that we are improving. This month, the Port is also exercising our membership with the National Safety Council, promoting the National Safety Month 2020 campaign. This year's National Safety Month theme or rallying cry is, "Who's your reason?" Observed annually in June, National Safety Month focuses on reducing leading causes of distraction, injury, and death. We are highlighting the emphasis topic each week in June and encouraging employees to bring safety home as well. In week 1, we promoted mental health. Week 2 is focused on ergonomics. Week 3, building a safety culture. And finally, week 4, driving safety. Curtis, that's my message for today.
Terrific, thank you, Stan. Commissioners, last Tuesday, I shared with you over the weekend, we had an all-staff town hall where we talked about the Port's values and the most recent of a series of tragedies that exposed the deep legacy of racism and white supremacy in this country. At that town hall, I invited our Alliance for Black Employees, or ABLE, employee resource group to share their experiences, thoughts, and emotions if they felt comfortable doing so. And I want to express my sincere appreciation for their courage to teach us, to give us the opportunity to listen and to learn. I have their consent to share some of the wisdom they conveyed to us. A few quotes from a few Port employees. First, the chair of ABLE, Nicole Murphy Garcia, said, "It's time to encourage our Port family to put your courage and purpose into action to change the world for the better." And Joy Fowler, who is our inclusion specialist and director inside the Port, said, quote, "I recognize there may be discomfort in conversation, and that is okay. We have to have them anyway, even if listening is your form of communication. People are hurting, communities are hurting, and we need to engage. Thank you, Nicole and Joy, for allowing me to share your comments. Commissioners, we've talked with all of you about the Port's DEI work, and we'll update you more specifically on that topic in August. But the events of the last few weeks further highlight that we must do more to challenge ourselves to find the racism embedded in the structures of our organization and explore ways to make, as one commissioner said yesterday, the change instead of a change. And I really think it's important that the Port take that to heart. For Port employees, every Thursday through September, representatives from the Port Police, the Alliance of Black Employees, and our pop culture team will hold inclusive conversations to process, understand, learn, engage, and hopefully heal from the recent deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, as well as the Central Park incident involving Christian Cooper. The first conversation will be a panel discussion followed by Q&A, and this event is open to everyone at the Port who'd like to participate. On to other issues. COVID-19, mentioned briefly by Stan this morning. As many of you know, Multnomah County has applied for and been granted the approval to move into phase 1 on June 12th, this weekend. The county is required to operate in phase 1 for 21 days before applying for phase 2. Only until phase 2 do employers have the option to require or recommend non-essential employees to work remotely. Although Multnomah County is not yet in phase 2, the Port has made the decision that we want to continue to do our part to keep the community safe by essentially recommending all non-essential employees continue to work remotely into the pre-vaccine foreseeable future. Employees that do enter the HQ in phase 2 will be required to follow prescriptive distancing and hygiene protocols. We're spending a lot of time and energy to make sure we get this right. And very broadly, commissioners, I'll just tell you, we're not in a big rush to get people back in the building if they don't absolutely have to be there. At PDX, we've seen a slow uptick in passenger volumes. Volumes were down 95% in April, down 90% in May, and as of June 3rd are down 85%. So we're seeing some ticking back up in our passenger volume. FEMA advises they'll be sending us a total of about 1 million cloth face coverings to share with other passenger airports in Oregon, PDX employees, and travelers. We recently had a TSA food pantry event at the airport after organizing several free meals for PDX employees. The Transportation Security Administration and U.S. Customs and Border Protection team members organized a pantry event for airport employees in need of food and supplies during the coronavirus pandemic. Thanks to generous donations from airport colleagues, the pantry was fully stocked, thousands of cans and jars, 200 bags and boxes of pasta, rolls of toilet paper, and so on. Very grateful for the partnership with TSA and CBP in that regard. Construction and PDX Next. I'm excited to share more next month, and Vince will be in to talk about the opening of Concourse E, which is still roughly on schedule. Southwest successfully moved into their new ticket counter and baggage makeup unit locations in advance of their move to the new Concourse E extension on July 15th. On Concourse B, the PDX Art Committee has selected local artist Ryan Feddersen to create a new permanent art installation. The themes of environmental stewardship, culture diversity, and it acknowledges the continual societal contributions of Indigenous people. Her piece for PDX is titled Inhabitants and is a series of interconnected artworks in steel, glass, and wood, which highlight the exceptional diversity of the Pacific Northwest. Ryan is an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation from the Okanagan and Arrow Lakes bands. On the marine side of the business, we continue to see fairly strong numbers in most of our marine lines. Last week, the SM vessel featured 931 container moves, our highest total since SM began calling at Portland. We're grateful for the work of our marine operations team and the longshoremen working at our terminals. Productivity remains really strong, and that in the face of taking a lot of steps to make sure they're safe and coronavirus free. However, following a trend throughout the year so far, our auto volumes dropped significantly in May, and we believe they could go even lower in June. As we've discussed previously, there are value chain issues on the lead-in side and customer demand issues on the demand side. So we expect that to be bumpy going forward. Cathay Pacific brought another 500,000 3-ply medical face masks into Oregon in the last week or so. Very grateful to our air cargo partner for making room on their flight for these important medical supplies, and look forward to working with Cathay on those projects into the future. That, Madam President, is my comments for the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis, very much for those comments, and appreciate in particular the discussion that you've begun to have at the port about issues related to structural racism. As we all know, we've begun taking steps in the last few years with the adoption, for example, of the equity lens to think about all of the port's operations in the context of our communities and how we best serve them given structural racism in our community and in our country. So I appreciate that work is continuing, and we'll myself continue to call on the port to look deeply at how we operate and what impacts we have on our community and how we address the past. I'm sure there are other commissioners who want to make a comment before I ask for a motion here.
Thank you, Madam President. This is Commissioner Alexander. I would echo your comments and Curtis. Certainly pleased to know that time was taken to sit down and engage with employees over the last week. And, I think one of the things that I am acutely aware of is that in some cases, organizations, entities are sort of coming to this realization as if it's a new discovery, and others are being reminded of things that they've already embraced and has been a part of their belief system. And I certainly believe that the port is in the latter category, but I would say the charge to us as a commission, and quite frankly, as individuals, is to make sure that the good doesn't become the enemy of the better. As I shared with you yesterday, I think many of us are doing good things, but our good enough is just not good enough. And it's going to demand that we lean in ways that may be uncomfortable. But again, we're not talking about just making incremental changes. We're talking about pivotal material change. And I encourage the dialogue, the focus, the commitment on the part of the leadership at the port to maintain a path where the good doesn't become an enemy of the better. Thank you.
This is Meg Nemi. Thank you, Madam President, as well as Commissioner Alexander. I absolutely support the comments that you just made. And I do really just want to mark this moment and say, how do we, as a commission that has an impact on the lives of the folks that work for the port, that are impacted economically by the industry that the port drives. And there are so many Black lives, Black folks that are working inside these port entities, and how we as a commission stand up to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to improve the conditions for folks that in the community as well as in the workplace. And so, I look forward to, and I do think this is really a moment for us to dig deeper and look how we can go broader. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you, commissioners. I will ask for a motion and a second to approve the executive director's report.
I move.
Second.
Thank you, Pam. Could you lead our roll call, please?
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Comas,
Aye.
Lamb, Commissioner Lamb,
Maybe she's muted.
she may be muted.
Yeah.
Commissioner Levy,
Aye.
Sorry.
thank you. Commissioner Nemi,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Halloran,
Aye.
Pierce,
Aye.
and Saruda.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I'd like to acknowledge public comments we've received from Frank Hildebrand of the Teamsters Local 305. I know that all of us commissioners received that prior to the meeting.
Correct.
And I'll call on Dan Pippinger for a COVID-19 update, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Curtis touched on a number of things, and I'll just highlight, I think, between his presentation and Stan, some things sort of between those. In general, port facilities are open and operating as normal as possible, obviously with a lot of new protocols and procedures, but we do have all of our facilities open and serving the public and the community. What I would like to highlight, I think just in a general sense, is a program the port has started. It's referred to as Build Back Better. It's really a phased approach, roughly aligned with the Oregon reopening phases of 1, 2, and 3 to reimagine and modify our facilities and our protocols to operate in a COVID-19 environment. And so the team has put together a great program right now that really highlights cleaning protocols, physical distancing, automation and touchless technology, communications, and new practices. I think we call them policies as well. And they're done across the port network, whether it's Marine, the Navigation Division, the headquarters and administrative part, or PDX, or the General Aviation Airports. And by having a program where we've identified good practices and things we should be doing, then we can assess them against our different businesses. So it's a very comprehensive program, in the restore phase, which is where we are right now, in line with the phase 1 reopening of Multnomah County. It's mainly focused on current programs and protocols, as opposed to imagining new ones, but we are on our path for that as well. At PDX, as Curtis mentioned, we have seen a slight increase in passenger traffic. I think also of note is that Volaris returned service to Guadalajara twice a week and are planning to add a third flight by the end of the month. Cargo volumes remain good, and we really are focused on modifying the terminal and operations for the safety of workers and travelers. As I mentioned last month, we put in place a requirement for face coverings and also tried to limit the congregation of people inside the terminal. I'd report to you that the face covering requirement is going very well. We've had very few complaints about that, and most people are very interested in wearing their face covering and helping both protect themselves, but also protect other travelers and workers at PDX. And we're very happy with that and really appreciate the community support in making travel safe. On the Marine side, as Curtis mentioned, volumes are very good. I think the ILW, the Longshoremen's Union, and the Port and Harbor Industrial, our stevedore at T6, continue to work very closely to make sure that we can continue productivity in the COVID-19 environment. Of also note, SM Line, the carrier, has entered a sharing agreement with MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Corporation, so that we're seeing MSC containers now carried on the SM ships. Think of it as kind of a code share, like on the airlines back in the day when you might buy a ticket on one airline but actually fly a leg on a different one. And that's great because that gives Oregon shippers, importers, and exporters different options, not just SM Line, but MSC as well, to source and send their products. And so on this last ship this week, about 6% of the containers were from MSC versus SM Line. And then finally, the dredge is operational down at the mouth of the Cowlitz River near Longview. They have a lot of COVID-19 protocols in place, including temperature checks before boarding the crew boat and sanitizing and cleaning between shifts, et cetera. So that's great news that they're out on the river working and helping keep the channel maintained for the benefit of shipping, not just to Port of Portland facilities, but all the private terminals and the other public ports in the Columbia River system. Madam Chair, that's my update for today.
Thank you, Dan. Just one question from me, having been able to visit the dredge operation, knowing that it's both very complicated and that it requires a significant number of people to do the work and keep it safe. In addition to cleaning, are you having to maintain smaller sizes of crew, or how are you managing the space issues?
Well, the crew requirement is somewhat set by the operation, but I know that they're having to distance on the shuttle boat, for example, and run more runs, for example, and then people are trying to stay apart on the dredge itself. It's actually, as you can imagine, on a vessel, quite complicated to do that, but they've set up some distancing and volume controls within the vessel itself to do it as best possible. And that's, I think it's a good example of why we're doing temperature checks there, is because it's hard to segregate the crew. So we want to be extra cautious.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Dan? Okay, thanks, Dan. If we could move to the first agenda item, please.
Thank you. This item is to request to amend the contract with Harbor Industrial Services, as I mentioned, out at Terminal 6 for the container operation, both for the ship side operation and the rail operation. Harbor began working with the port in 2015 in a crane maintenance role and has assumed an increasingly large role as the intermodal operation was added with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, and again in January when the SM lines called this year. The current contract ends in January of 2021 and has one remaining one-year option. Due to the increased volume from the SM lines, we're running short on the allocated funds, authority for the allocated funds. And we'd like to continue the successful relationship and arrangement with Harbor Industrial and add more term to the contract. Here to discuss the item and present it is Jeff Owen, the Director of Marine Operations.
And thanks, Dan. Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners, and thanks for having me. I hope everyone and their families are well. As you know, the past 6 months have seen the resumption of vessel container service at Terminal 6, and that together with the continuing intermodal rail shuttle represent a significant step forward in the port's vision for T6 as a diversified cargo facility. And with that said, I would say this agenda item requests approval to amend the existing maintenance and service contract between the Port of Portland and Harbor Industrial Services to extend the term for 5 years, add 3 additional one-year options to extend, and to authorize the expenditure of additional funds of in the amount of up to $237 million. Next slide. Harbor Industrial has been a key element in developing and maintaining the relationships which have resulted in the continuing success of both the intermodal and vessel operations at Terminal 6, particularly in rebuilding the relationship with the ILWU labor to build a new normal for productivity and success at Terminal 6. I think it's important to note that T6 is relatively unique on the West Coast. It's different than internally, it's different than traditional tenant lease relationships that the port has, which usually involve limited maintenance and capital responsibilities. It is the only terminal that directly serves Oregon and the region and provides the Portland, Oregon, Southern Washington region, and provides access to the container market for Oregon shippers. It's not a traditional West Coast arrangement where a stevedore will normally direct lease a terminal from the port. And then the port really steps out of the relationship, and then it's just the terminal operator, the stevedore, operating the terminal. Here, the port has hired the stevedore, Harbor Industrial, and they operate the terminal on our behalf. The T6 container operations, both the intermodal yard and the vessel service, are a diverse and intertwined set of relationships involving the port, our contracted carrier SM, BNSF Railroad, and most importantly, I would say ILW Labor, and then Harbor Industrial Services. And success at T6 is dependent on these healthy relationships between all these parties, and the often fragile nature of the container business requires stability, transparency, and trust between the component members of the operation. Next slide. For those of you who are newer and may not know Harbor Industrial Services, here are just a few key points about their experience. They've been in the crane maintenance and special project contracting worldwide since 1991. They currently maintain over 50 container handling cranes and other support equipment in multiple ports. They've done work for port in the past, separate from the current contract. Cranes 80 and 81 at Terminal 6 were commissioned by Harbor. They've done elevator installations for us on 78 and 79. And of course, they have been operating the intermodal yard and most recently the SM line vessel operations. They maintain equipment at the Seattle cruise terminals, and they manage the commissioning and startup and testing of 38 automated guide vehicles at the Long Beach Container Terminal. And for those of you who haven't seen an automated terminal or partially automated terminal, it's quite a remarkable operation and involves everything from sort of basic mechanical engineering to electronics and computer software. It's quite an operation. Next slide. So here you see the significant terms that we're proposing today in the commission item. The current contract, we're looking for an additional $12 million disbursement authority to complete the current option term through January of 2021. And then we're proposing an amendment so that the final year of the current contract would be replaced with a new 5-year term and then 3 subsequent options, as you see there. I think it's important to note that those numbers on the screen represent the potential expenditures under the cost based on current container volumes. And so obviously those could potentially fluctuate depending on what the actual business is doing during the term of the contract. I think it's also important to note that we have a right to terminate on 180 days notice should the situation at Terminal 6 radically change and that became necessary. Next slide. I wanted to talk just a few key points as we have this discussion today. The costs, as I noted, are expended based on satisfactory revenue operations at the terminal. The annual expenditures under the contract will be a component of our normal budget cycle and approval. The port, as I noted, has limited exposure. We have the contract 180-day termination provision. I think it's also important to note that approximately 83% of the expenditures of this contract are for direct reimbursement of ILW labor costs, which are of course subject to the ILW West Coast contract between the PMA and the ILWU. So these are, good working ILWU jobs that the port is, providing a direct reimbursement for, so that this service can be maintained for the benefit of Oregon and the region. And then finally, the projections for these expenditures are based on the currently understood container volumes, both for the intermodal and vessel operations, and they're reviewed on an ongoing basis. So those could change. I think it is, as Dan noted, important to point out that the last vessel was around 1,000 containers, and that's really a significant improvement from where we started. And I think things are going really quite well. So with that, next slide. We're here to request approval to amend the existing maintenance and service contract between the Port of Portland and Harbor Industrial Services Corporation to extend the term for 5 years, add 3 additional 1-year options to extend, and to authorize the expenditure of additional funds in the amount of $237 million. And that ends my comments, so I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners?
Jeff, hi, this is Commissioner Alexander. Just the contract provision of allowing for 180 days to terminate. How does that compare with previous arrangements for term 6?
I'll defer to Dan because I'm not sure what our ICTSI provision was, if we had one. What I will say is that's an extension. Originally, this particular contract contained a 30-day notice requirement, Commissioner Alexander, and that was upgraded to the 180 days with mutual agreement from both Harbor and the Port, because we really felt that the 30 days was just too short to allow for sort of a normal assessment of the situation that might cause that provision to be invoked.
Which is wise, I believe. I was just curious as to whether that was sort of a material improvement over the last contract. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion and second to approve the executive director's recommendation.
Motion?
Second.
Pam, would you please lead us through the roll call?
Yes, Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald, Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Pierce,
Aye.
and Saruda.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, would you please introduce the next item?
Yes, good morning again. This item is to request approval to amend personal services contract for the final design of the Taxiway A or Alpha rehabilitation project at the Hillsborough Airport. As you know, last year we rebuilt the main runway at Hillsborough, and this next cycle is to reconstruct almost the entire length of the parallel taxiway during the summer of 2021. This work will provide plans, specifications, estimates, reports, and the staging and phasing plan so the Port can prepare to advertise for construction in the future. Here to present the item is Eric Forsyth, Engineering Project Manager for the Port.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm requesting approval to amend a personal services contract with Mead & Hunt for final design services of the Taxiway Alpha rehab project at Hillsborough Airport in the approximate value of $906,000. Next slide, please. Major scope elements are shown here. We're going to be designing a mixture of full depth reconstruction, pavement rehab, and a little bit of new construction at Taxiway Alpha 6 over the next approximately 8 months, all leading up to a bid package that we intend to advertise this coming February. The design work is a mixture of pavement subgrade, new stormwater infrastructure, and new electrical infrastructure will be self-performed by Port staff, blended with Mead & Hunt services. Next slide, please. So as Dan mentioned, work scope elements are shown here. This all leads up to a advertising bid package first part of next year. This is all meeting FAA standard, including reports, phasing plans, and all of our work for the eventual bid package. I will note that construction administration work that Mead and Hunt would be performing during construction is not included in this amendment, and we intend to amend their contract first part of next year when that's appropriate. Next slide, please. Schedule is as shown. The team's been working very hard to maintain this fairly aggressive schedule. When everything will fall into place, we intend to construct, as Dan mentioned, summer of next year, with another resulting commission action for a construction contract coming up in April. Next slide, please. Budget and funding are shown. As you can see, funding comes from the Port Cost Center, but the consultant and contractor costs will be largely reimbursed completely by the FAA, upwards of around approximately $10 million. Disadvantaged enterprise goal for the personal services contract is 11.78%. Mead and Hunt is currently on target to meet this goal. Next slide, please. Staff requests approval of the executive director's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the commission?
Nope.
Thank you. I'll call for a motion and second to approve the executive director's recommendation.
I so move. Second.
Thank you, Pam.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kouprokomis,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald, Nemi. Commissioner Nemi, are you on mute?
Yeah, but looks like she is.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Pierce,
Aye.
and Saruda.
Aye.
Thank you, Pam. Dan, could you please introduce the final agenda item?
You bet. Thank you. This item requests the approval of a 3-year collective bargaining agreement extension between the Port and the International Association of Firefighters, Local 43. 2 months ago, Curtis talked about the furlough program that was being applied to Port administrative staff. And after that, we went and had conversations with our representative groups. And I want to express my appreciation for the firefighters and their willingness to have the conversation and their understanding of the financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. While this started as a discussion on a furlough program, because of the nature of the firefighters' work, their specialties, and the way shifts are constructed, a straight furlough program did not make a lot of sense because we would have to backfill the positions even if we did a furlough. And I think both parties came to some creative techniques to extend the contract and get a lot of the upfront savings that the Port was looking for. And this extension, I would say, is really a market-based extension. We feel very good about it, and again, are very appreciative of the firefighters for their coordination with the Port and their willingness to engage in that conversation. Here to introduce the topic, or the item, is Blaise Lamphere, our Labor Relations Manager at the Port.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning, Commissioners. I'm pleased to report, as Dan mentioned, that in this particular discussion was really born out of the fact that furloughs would not work well operationally with this group because the majority of firefighters are on the line and on a 24 on 48 off schedule. So in looking at alternatives, the union was willing to forego their scheduled wage increase, the first and only union to date to forego a scheduled wage increase that was part of their existing agreement for July of 2020. And we came to agreement as part of this extension to, in outgoing years, we are on the CPIW West Class A Index, second half with all of our bargaining groups now, for a minimum of 1% to 4% wage increases for the next 3 years, 7/1, 21, 22, and 23. Also, as part of this agreement, the fire union agreed to forego the implementation of a Department of Public Safety standards and training certification pay, so a premium pay that they negotiated in the existing contract was supposed to be implemented this July. They decided to forego it until July of 21. And again, understanding the focus on short-term savings. Next slide, please. What is also being added as part of this then is additional Kelly days. There'll be 2 additional Kelly days in January of 2022. And again, that is really a market adjustment, giving them a total of 12 per year, and then 1 additional one added in January of 24, tracking with the market. We look at 8 other fire agencies in the region when we are considering these adjustments. Also a 40-hour employee vacation accrual rate. We took a hard look at that. We first introduced Kelly days about 12 years ago in the contracts with our fire union. And while those have been reflective of the market, the 40-hour employee vacation accrual rate has not been. And we found we needed to adjust that because we were actually near the bottom in the market area. And so we are implementing that change in January of 22, and this will get our group to the market rate, basically mid-market from the lower tier of the market by making this adjustment for these employees, which this affects 4 positions at fire department. Simultaneously to agreeing to this, we also agreed to include the firefighters, the fire personnel, in a program that was designed and introduced in January 2019 for our admin employees for paid parental leave. So I'm pleased to announce that we negotiated that as well as part of this in a separate memorandum. Next slide, please. We looked at the estimated financial impact. You can see the savings there. We referred to year 0 because that's basically the existing agreement now that had been slated to expire next year. So over $350,000 in short-term savings as part of this negotiated extension. And then you see the amount of new money being at estimated $815,000 over the life of extension, and that would also include any kind of PERS upticks, so basically the fixed costs of PERS increases during that period as well. Next slide, please. It's the executive director's recommendation. We're seeking approval to enter into the 3-year collective bargaining agreement extension with the International Association of Firefighters Local 43. Are there any questions?
If there are no questions, I'll ask for a motion and second to approve the executive director's recommendation.
I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Pam.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kouprokomis,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald, Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Pierce,
Aye.
and Saruda.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. We've completed the business of the commission, and I thank everybody for their attendance. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
day.
Thank you.
Very efficient. Be safe.
Everybody be safe.